We couldn't be more thrilled with how this national meeting has transpired so far. My name is Elizabeth Gaines. I am a senior fellow at the Forum for Youth Investment here. I've been here for about a decade. And we were just reflecting at our table about how awesome it was this morning that the word love was invoked. So thank you, Marita and crew. That was really, I think, a much needed conversation about something that's much needed in our young people's lives. Should I stay away from that? All right. So this closing plenary is going to have a little bit of everything. I'm going to try to keep all of you active adult learners engaged one way or the other. We're going to have a little bit of a soapbox from me. Sorry, it's just got to happen. We're going to have a talk show with some lovely esteemed guests. We are going to have a little bit of a slideshow with some math and geography in there for those folks. We're going to even do technology use, so you're going to have to be ready for that. And hopefully we'll get to a little bit of the Socratic method with you all. So I want to start by just saying that I've been on a bit of a journey in the last few years at the Forum. And I have a theme that I am using this year. I am using it next year. I'm going to use it the year after that. And I'm going to use it until we actually make big progress on a goal that I'm saying what gets funded is what gets done for young people. So, you know, it's important, we talk about what gets measured gets done, but I want to be that voice for what gets funded gets done. And a little bit of just that personal story. I know you all have your own personal story that brings you into this room today. For me, my journey in this youth development work began in the early 90s as an AmeriCorps volunteer. Yeah, AmeriCorps. Got the sweatshirt still, and it's a little ragged, but I've got it. So AmeriCorps is one of those programs that we are concerned about right now, right? Went from AmeriCorps to 21st Century Community Learning Center program. My program that I ended up running in Wisconsin was, in fact, one of the very first 21st Century Community Learning Centers in the country. 21st Century is now at risk in terms of the funding prospectus for that. That goes on through the course of the 90s and the 2000s, right? So essentially, I went on then to be an advocate in my home state of Missouri. I did some work to try to secure those tobacco settlement dollars for young people. Anybody get involved in that back in the late 90s, early 2000s? We wanted to make sure that if, you know, that big source of funding was coming through, that young people got a piece of it. And then I came onto the Forum, again, about 12 years ago, and I've been helping state and local policymakers to really think about how they align their policies and align their resources. But it started to feel like looking for coins under the cushions, right? It started to feel like we're not keeping our eye on the prize enough. And so there's, for me, a little bit of a shift back to the local level. And I think that it's not just me that's having that kind of shift. We are seeing this trend in a whole bunch of ways. I mean, if you think of the response we've seen already from mayors and county commissioners on, you know, this work to secure a healthy future for their own communities. This trend toward a new American localism is real, and it's here, and it's going to be continuing to grow. And so what does that mean? That means that at the local level, people are ready to roll up their sleeves and get a little bit more engaged in solving the problems that we face. So you've all seen the, if we could go back to the slides, you've all seen the, there we go. You've all seen the insulated education pipeline that we talk about a lot at the Forum. You know, we use this a lot. We think about, you know, what the right set of supports and opportunities are. We think about, you know, those connection points up and down that pipeline. We talk about the quality of those offerings. We talk about measuring the outcomes we're getting out of each of those. But we rarely talk about what this whole picture costs and who should pay for it and who pays for these different levels. So just bear with me, this is not going to be a fully detailed explanation of who's paying for which of these pieces of the insulated pipeline, but if you think about the basic services, those things around the outside of the pipeline, typically we're looking at the federal social safety net, and we have to stay completely vigilant in making sure that that social safety net continues to be in place, right? You think about that inner part of the pipeline, the education, the K-12 education piece. Most states have a formula that they use to pay for a significant part of that. Obviously, school districts are paying for a large part of that too. But who's paying for that yellow stuff? Who's really paying for that? And that's the work that a lot of you all are doing. And that's what we want to talk a little bit more about today. So we are going to attempt now to do something that is a little bit scary for a presenter during lunch. I'm going to encourage you to take out your cell phones. This is where the technology use comes in. So everybody take a second to take out your cell phone and wave it in the air once you have it so I know that people have their cell phones. Okay. Okay, so you're going to basically go to create a new text message, however you would do that. And where you'd normally put a phone number, type in 22333. And then in the message, you're going to just write ready by 21 with no spaces, okay? And there should be some forum staff walking around if you're like, I'm not sure what you're talking about. And again, wave your phone in the air if you've done that. Okay, great. So the next thing we're going to do is I want to find out from you, when you think about what's funding your work, remembering that a lot of you are in that social emotional space, that middle insulation piece that's harder to put a finger on in terms of funding streams. What's supporting your work primarily? Is it local government dollars, state government dollars, federal government dollars? And just to give you an idea, if one of those things is supporting, all you have to do is type that letter in and hit send. So if you receive mostly United Way dollars, local foundations, national foundations, individual donors, corporations, fees for your services, or a dedicated children's fund in your community. And Jimmy, I think I'm going to have you give us the results. Is that possible? We're going to give you a second to type in your answers. And while you're doing that, I'm actually going to ask Sheila to come on up. Yeah. So you'll be here, then we can have you ready. Okay, so this is interesting. Looks like a lot of local foundation dollars. Way to go, local foundations. Local foundations, you're going to love what we're about to talk about, because this is going to relieve some of the burden on you. Federal government dollars, so that social safety net and the things that we were concerned about, you're going to have to keep your eye on those. And then local government and state government. Okay, this is really helpful. That was just a way for us to assess data on where most of the funding is coming from, all these social emotional supports, so thank you. Okay, moving on. So there are, right now, about 31 places around the country that we've been able to track that actually have gone to their voters at the local level to ask them, should we tax ourselves to pay for children's services? Do we value children's services enough that we're willing to pay a little bit in taxes to support that? And these are the places around the country that have done it. And together, those places generate almost $1 billion. And that's only 30 communities, some of them very small. So I did a little bit of math and I realized we've got about 106 communities represented at this national meeting. It's not bad. And if every community that's represented at this meeting generated a dedicated fund, the average size of one of these dedicated funds is about $30 million annually into perpetuity, oftentimes. We're talking about over $3 billion generated to support children and youth programs and services around the country. That's 3 times what the 21st Century Community Learning Centers typically are allocated at, right? So that's not bad. So I want to share a little bit about what we're talking about when we say the Children's Funding Project. Again, it's something that we have been developing over the past couple of years to respond to this growing momentum, dare I say movement, among communities to do this work. And what I've started to do is use 4 words, and I wish that guy that asked for words was here right now, because I want everyone to remember these words: find, align, generate, and evaluate. I think those are 4 really important levers that we need to be thinking about how to pull at the local level to make sure we know who's funding that insulated pipeline in our community. So find, how are you going to make sure you're tracking, analyzing, and forecasting the funding in your community? Align. This is where you really start to think about how you identify the gaps. You know where in that pipeline you really have a couple of different things going on that could be blended together, and you make a better picture out of that. Oh, this is generate is what we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about. And then evaluate. Critically important, because if you can't make the case that you're getting a good return on those public dollars to support young people, and you're really seeing the trajectory of their life outcomes change, you're not going to be as successful in generating those dollars going forward. So I have brought my lovely esteemed colleague Sheila Capestany up here to talk about some of the really impressive work that has been going on in King County, and I'm going to come sit with you. I think we have one more question, though, that we want to ask folks before we get started. So as you look at this set of 4 things, is there one of these areas that you feel you need the most help with in your community? The forum is trying to build out our tools and our resources to support people in doing this work, and we want to know where we need to build up our supports. So is it in finding those resources, tracking them down, knowing what the purpose is? Is it in aligning? Is it in generating new resources at the local level? Or is it in evaluating the use of the current resources you have? We'll give folks a second. And Jimmy, you can make that a live. Jimmy's good. Thanks, Jimmy. Yeah. Isn't this fun to see the numbers go up and down? We're competing. It's a race. All right. So hopefully most of you have gotten to put your numbers in, even though it's still going, still going. All right, I'm going to keep us moving. So, this clicker doesn't work great. All right, so we're gonna zoom in on a few of these places, and this is the talk show portion of the program. And Sheila, I'd like for you to just share a little bit about what has recently transpired in King County, really over the past 3 years. And the forum has had the benefit of being able to be a small, tiny piece of that work, but it tells the story of find, align, generate, and evaluate pretty darn well. So I'm thrilled to have you share that with folks here. So I'm going to put up some info on King County that can be up there while you talk, but share with folks what's happened.
Okay, well, hello everyone. We actually moved through, perhaps intentionally or not intentionally, I'm not sure, the whole Find a Line, the process. So our movement really started from two different places. Our county executive was very interested in what was going on for children birth to 5 and was very, very committed to figuring that out for the county. And our county council was very interested in youth. Both started separately to explore and to think about what's going on. And it took a few months for them to realize they were exploring in different ways, and let's make this one spectrum. So by the time we got to really deeply analyzing what was going on, we were looking at prenatal to 24, what's happening with our children for that whole span. So once that collaboration was established, our council directed our departments to do a pretty deep analysis of funding. And funding, programs, services, what were the investments the county was already making in youth, what were the investments we were making in that early prenatal to 5 time. And we discovered a few interesting and not so good things. One of the biggest things that we discovered was that our general fund, which was funding about 25% of our youth services, was going almost the vast majority to our criminal justice system. And investing in young people after crises had happened. So criminal justice, substance use, mental health. So we recognized that we wanted to turn that around and begin thinking about how could we get out in front of things as a county rather than investing just in the end part for folks. So we really used that information that we gathered about funding. We also did an assessment with you all around programs and services that were available through the county and provided by county and provided by our partners to see what is actually happening. And then that was about a year after that process, we came up with our Youth Action Plan. So the Youth Action Plan lays out for the county both internal and external changes that we need to be able to make to turn the corner in our youth, to realign our investments, looking at places where we would be pulling together efforts that needed to be pulled together, looking at efforts that were parallel and making sure that they just complemented one another, and looking at the places where we had gaps in funding. And so the Youth Action Plan was passed by our county council in 2015. And really what came out of that is like, this is a great plan. We've done all this analysis. What are we going to do? And with what money are we going to do it?
And that's where a lot of people that we've worked with over the years sort of pause and look around like, how are we going to pay for this plan? So this is exciting.
Yes. So we got to that point, and our executive got together with our council and said, you know, let's start a new funding source for this. It was called Best Starts for Kids. And really because the idea started with the executive around his thoughts around prenatal to 5, we sort of kept that name. But Best Starts for Kids was formed, and it is a $400 million investment over 6 years. It's a property tax levy, and it's about 14 cents per assessed $1,000 value on people's homes. So the average taxpayer in our county will pay about $56 more a year in property tax to pay for this. It turns out to be about $65 million a year for 6 years. We are in year 1. We just finished year 1, so we're ready to get going on this.
Yeah.
So the levy passed in November 2015. And
so that takes us through Find, Align, Generate. We're going to ask you a question. So say you're Sheila and you're looking at a brand new fund of $65 million a year. How would you think about allocating those dollars across your county for kids? So I've just put some of the many options that you could use to decide how to allocate those dollars. I would love for people to think about which of these options, whether it's young people with the highest need or the priority and let's just put the money there. The quality of the applications is the most important thing, and we want to make sure we're getting high quality proposals, so that's what we're going to focus on. Evidence-based programs, we know we can get much better return on investment if we just invest in evidence-based programs alone. Equal geographic spread, sorry, was that? No, that's spelled right. It looked wrong. Equal geographic spread across the county. It's a wide, vast county. or some sort of a formula of the above. So go ahead and select which of those would be the way that you would do this if you were Sheila. And we're not going to reveal this one just yet. We'll let you choose independently. And I should say, you also had to think about a wide age spectrum,
yes,
too, while you were doing that. That could have been another option to put up there. Okay, Jimmy, I think let's reveal that. Let's see what we get. Okay, fascinating. Fascinating. So, this is your peers telling you what they would have done. You've already done it, so let's talk about how you did it.
So we did pretty much a formula of the above with lots of things in that. So Best Starts for Kids, actually the funds are allocated per around ages. Mm-hmm. So 50% of all the investments go for programs for young people, prenatal to 5. 35% of our investments are for 5 to 24. 10% go to supporting community and community work, and 5% of the levy goes towards funding evaluation. It turns out to be a little bit less than that because we had some sort of crazy tax things happening that we have to mitigate, but about 4.5% towards evaluation.
That's great.
So the other thing about the Best Starts plan is it is deeply embedded in the equity and social justice work that the county is doing, and so we developed an intense implementation plan. We forwarded that to the council, and that plan really set the overarching goals for what we have for Best Starts for Kids. Since that past council in November, we actually have been working on the details of how will we allocate those funds. We've got strategy areas, we have a pretty clear idea of where we want to be heading, but now is the time that we're really digging in deep to saying, how are we going to get those dollars out? Where are we going to emphasize? So it's going to depend on strategy. Some of that will be, as we're looking at our equity and social justice issues, we're really going to be looking at disparities and disproportionality. So that's a very big part of how those dollars will be allocated. Geography, as you mentioned, is a really big issue in King County. Race, class, and geography intersect in our county to concentrate in our South County area, and there's no doubt that they will be getting a lot of our investments. But we also know that we have parts of our county where there's hidden pockets of poverty as well, so we'll be looking at that.
In fact, I didn't bring this up to you, so if you don't know about it, don't feel bad. But the fact that you've got, 36 cities contained within King County, and that those cities all signed on early on to say, that's how we want the county to allocate these dollars, is pretty remarkable, because typically, I mean, I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
Right. Well, we worked very closely with all of our smaller municipalities. We also have 250,000 people who are living in our county in unincorporated areas, so that we're their local government. So we had that aspect. We had all of the cities that came on. And when we put our implementation plan together, we worked very closely with the coalition of those suburban and rural cities in our area.
Yep. Well, so if you're sitting there and you're about to tune out because you're thinking, oh, well, that's King County, and we can't do that because we're not King County. One, I want you to remember that map I put up. There's a whole lot of places around the country that have done this that are much smaller, much more conservative. It really is a diversity of communities that have been able to do it. And Sean, I would love to have you come up and talk a little bit about what is going on in St. Lucie County, because this is a place that's had a dedicated children's fund for, you said 27 years?
Yep, 27.
27 years. So we are way past adolescence with that particular fund.
We're all grown up.
We're all grown up. So tell us a little bit about St. Lucie County and what we need to know.
First of all, just by show of hands, has anybody heard of St. Lucie County? Those are the people I networked with during this conference. We're just a little, and I know that we have some Palm Beach County folks here and Miami. They both have children's services councils, and really, I wholeheartedly steal from them all the time. I'm excited to see on that PowerPoint slide. I was a little worried that you might say rural for demographics, compared to King County. But we are very much a suburban community. We were originally established as a retirement community. So Port St. Lucie in the last 5 to 10 years has been one of the fastest growing cities in America and in the nation. But in 1990, so in the state of Florida, state law allows communities, counties, to establish a dedicated funding source for children. They're called Children's Services Council or Children's Trust or the Juvenile Welfare Boards. You can pick from those 3 names. And it's a 2-step process. You have to first get your county commissioners to vote and establish an ordinance to establish a Children's Services Council, and then you have to go to the voters for taxing authority. So in 1990, St. Lucie County, I think mostly because Palm Beach and Martin County, the counties below us, had gotten them, established a Children's Services Council with 58% of the vote. And just to give you an idea, when they passed 1990, the 58% represented 5,800 people. That's how long ago and how small the community was. So we've been funding children's programs since then. And one of the first things that we did, and I'll be honest, I wasn't there in 1990. I was 1 year away from graduating college. I came in 97. One of the first things that they did was they conducted a needs assessment and identified 19 childhood children indicators. Everything from teen pregnancy for females ages 10 to 17, juvenile crime, child maltreatment, uninsured rate, 19 of them all together. And we've continued to track those every single year. So we can show the trends of where the data is going. When we first started funding...
These, by the way, these are pretty impressive numbers.
Yeah. You know, you told me you were going to show those, and I remember thinking, is that a reflection of how bad it was in 1990? Or how much work we've done? And I think it's a combination of both. So early on, when they first established the Children's Services Council, they were following very similar to a federal model. They would fund a program for 5 years, and whether it was successful or not, and they would let it go. But what we find is when we let it go, there was nowhere else for them to go, because the only other funders in our community are the United Way, which is about 1/8 of our budget, and we work closely with our United Way, and the county. Those are the only funders. So we quickly changed that model. So we have some programs that we have funded for 18 plus years. And it's not legacy funding. Quite honestly, it's because it works. And the other thing that we quickly realized, and something that I talk a lot about with my team, is, you know, every business is as successful as they are in working with their customers. And I know I'm getting into business world here, but we have 3 customers. We have the children and families that we serve, the programs that we fund, and the taxpayers. You know, and obviously we design programs to help our children and families, but we are nothing but funders and evaluators if it not for our programs. So we try to partner with our programs. So when we go out and monitor a program, we're not monitoring them, we're mentoring them. Because if they don't succeed, we don't succeed. If they succeed, you know, we succeed. So we are, you know, I had this conversation with a gentleman from the Weichert Center?
Yeah,
Weichert Center in our little table, and he was talking about how funders don't allow enough for admin. You know, federal funding, it's 5% or 10%. You know, being localized, you know, I am in the community that we're serving, and these programs are working. My children went through these programs. We have programs from birth to 18. We have a universal nurse home visit, programs for children with developmental delays, after-school programs, reading mentors, the whole 9 yards. And I'll talk about the secret thing that we're going to talk about. But we are in that field. And my team that goes out and works with the programs, they know everybody that works with the programs. So we are in it with them. So, you know, we've had programs that come to us. And obviously, I don't want to fund 50% admin costs if I don't have to, because one of my customers, again, is the taxpayer. But we've had programs that have come to us and said, look, we're getting federal and state money and your money. Federal allows us 5% admin, state's 10%. I need to ask for 24% admin cost. And if they can make the argument, we will do that, because it's all about the success and the outcomes. So the other thing that I think is unique in our community that has made us so successful, besides very specifically, we fund, and evaluate, and it's a nonstop cycle. Mapping, finding out if our investments are in the right areas, is we have something in our community called the Round Table. I think they came up with the name because of like Round Table from the Knights.
Right.
It's not a round table we sit at. It's in my office. It's a square table. So what it is they started this about 20 years ago we wanted to start a juvenile assessment center in our community. We didn't have one. We didn't have the state funding for it. So the director of the Children's Services Council at the time, a county commissioner, and the head of the Department of Juvenile Justice got together and said, how do we make this happen? And then the next issue came up, and the next issue came up, and eventually the roundtable, as it is today, I believe has 20-plus members. And what sits at that, we meet once a month, is all the funders, which are myself and the United Way, all the heads of the Department of Children and Families, Department of Juvenile Justice, the Department of Health, the agency that's the head of our community-based care. We have the sheriff, 2 police chiefs, the fire chief, a state representative. We come together once a month to discuss children's issues and policies that we can change to make our community better.
Hey, now, you didn't even tell me you had that, and that's a children's cabinet, man.
Yeah, it's basically our own children's cabinet. We've been meeting for 20-plus years. So what we also do is we do a comprehensive strategy. So every 5 to 10 years, we follow Catalano and Hawkins' comprehensive plan identifying risk and protective factors. And we've expanded upon it because we've gone into some health issues. And what we do is we have the roundtable of all the policymakers and the funders, and then we have a steering committee, which is made up of all the providers. And then we have networks, academic success, youth violence, economics, and we work a plan. And this plan identifies in domains risk factors and protective factors, and everybody at that table works that plan. So my funding strategy is the plan that whole community has developed. And I think that's why we've been so successful in some of those outcomes. Now,
okay, so now you
get to talk about the fun stuff.
More controversial things.
So we were established in 1990, and you saw the outcomes. With that kind of track record, and we'd been around for 20 years, you would think that everybody thought what we did was phenomenal and great, and who would ever want to get rid of us? Well, in 2010, a senator from our area changed the state law to say that all children's services councils had to go back on the ballot. Now, as a funder, you never think to market or advertise yourself. Why would you? You just work behind the scenes to make sure things happen. So that was a little stressful time. I'm 48 years old, but I look a lot younger prior to 2010. In 2010, we did a survey of our community, and we found out that 18% of the community knew who the Children's Services Council was. That's not too bad, right? As a funder. But what we found out behind that was most of the people thought we were the Department of Children and Families. So nobody knew who we were. And and I would explain to people, at the Children's Services Council, we're an independent district that funds children's programs or invests in children's programs from birth to 18, from help with newborns, parenting support, after-school programs, reading mentors, all for the benefit of children. And that had no play in the community at all. So in 2012, an outside group hired a political consultant to find out what spoke to the community. And then based upon that, we changed the entire way that we talk about what we do. I never lead with that I'm an independent taxing district, because big shock here, people don't like taxes. But if they do like taxes, they like taxes spent in their community. But what I say is, somebody asks me, what does the Children's Services Council do? I say, and I've said this 1,000 times, we do 5 things for our community. We make sure every baby's a healthy baby. We stop child abuse before it happens. We keep kids off the streets. We keep them in school. And we keep them off drugs, alcohol, and other risky behaviors. And usually, at that point thank you.
It's not as controversial as I thought.
At that point in the conversation, people have already moved on. They're like, oh, that sounds cool. And if they ask me, well, how do you do that? Oh, we're a dedicated funding source because it's so important to make sure every baby's a healthy baby, stop child abuse, go through that whole list. You address it and pivot. And we communicated that for a period of about 12 months, really, communicated that message. And it has permeated what we do and how we talk about what we do. So, for example, we used to publish a 20-page annual report, and we would talk about a lot of the concepts that were discussed here, SEL, all that stuff. That means nothing to the general public at large. Honestly, my mother didn't even know what I did until I explained those 5 things.
And that's where I think we miss an opportunity to communicate with a broader public about these things that we do in a language that they understand. So I thought it would be controversial, but maybe it's not controversial to frame what we do in those ways. And I'd be curious, if we can, just if there's any microphones in the room, if folks have dabbled in this kind of messaging or thought about how to message the work you're doing to get more traction and support for these things, or if you think that talking about keeping kids off the streets and off drugs is maybe not something you feel comfortable with. I'd be really curious to just hear people's thoughts on that. Does anyone have a thought that they want to share or want to be thinking about?
While they're thinking about that, I just want to let you know, spoiler alert, we got 85.6% of the vote.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I would say, if you show the Florida map one more time, what is it, 4 of the 8 have gone back now?
Yes. 4 of the 8 have gone back, and nobody got less than 72% of the vote.
And I would love for people to tell me an example in Florida where 72% of the voters agreed on something at all.
Yeah.
I mean, that might be the only example
so
in the history of Florida.
And that messaging, keep in mind, the average age voter in St. Lucie County was 64 years old. And the average voter was not born and raised in St. Lucie County, Florida. Majority of our population is from New York, to be honest with you.
That's right.
Yeah, there we go. Now some applause.
So I want to bring up Todd Patterson, an old buddy of mine, who actually turned me on to voter engagement in the 2004 election, and it opened up a whole different world for me as a child and youth advocate to how political campaigns work and how you actually do that kind of organizing work to make that happen. So Todd, I would love to start with just a little bit of the recent success that's going to make people feel good, because I'm from Missouri, so I can say this, but you know, this is the story of how even the state of Missouri, even in this most recent election year, could go to their voters and get them to support something like this. So tell us what just happened in Jackson County.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank all of you. It's been a pleasure to be here this week. Jackson County contains the city of Kansas City, and Kansas City's much like Austin, a very progressive, up-and-coming urban area, but that's only half the county. The other half the county is got very great despair factors, tends to be a lot more conservative. Trump got something like 63% of the vote in the eastern part of the county. So we had quite a lot of tough turf. Our original game plan in Jackson County was, we'll concentrate on the city. We'll get out the progressive voters. They're certainly going to support a tax for kids to establish a children's services fund. That was working okay until we had a very unique circumstance. Because the sales tax margin in the Kansas City area is so high, there's only a little bit of elbow room left, okay, to levy new taxes from it. And all the children's services funds are sales tax based, except for one in the state of Missouri, so as a footnote. So we had some progressive groups come out against us because they wanted the sales tax revenues for other things other than kids. Okay, whether it was East Side development or other physical infrastructure objectives that they had. So, 10 days before the election, about the time, right before the release of the Comey letter, I always remember that, we found out through our modeling, our data analytics, that we were about 5,000 votes shy of victory. So where did we go? We went to the eastern part of the county and targeted women who were not frequent voters, who were planning to vote for Donald Trump, who had kids. And through a text messaging program, we identified our block through a text messaging program. We identified about 22,000 of these potential Trump voters. We only needed 5,000 of them to get 51%. Okay? We ended up getting 13,000 of them and won with 59.2%. The lesson in this is that if you are from tough turf, conservative turf, and in Missouri where the fund has passed, In over half the counties, they vote for the Republican presidential nominee at a rate of 62% plus every 4 years. These are very anti-tax counties. One of them, St. Charles County, is considered one of the top 10 anti-tax counties in the country. Okay? So, as you look at your locality and you try to assess your opportunity, remember that politics has strange bedfellows. Okay? And it's just about constructing, for that moment, the roadmap to get you there, to 50+1 or whatever your margin may be.
So there's a few things that we don't typically do in this room, right? Things like, and I have to look, because I'm like, what are those things that we don't do? We don't often think about state-enabling legislation. We don't often think about fundraising for political campaigns. We don't think about polling, voter modeling, whatever that is. You sort of started to explain that. The coalition building for this kind of grassroots political activity. Would you have anything to add about that? And I'm going to actually find out from the audience what area they feel least equipped right now to do, but anything you would add to that list, or is that about the right list?
I think that's a good list. That's
so
a good
let's
place
keep our
to start.
phones out. And this was one of the yard signs.
Yes.
Yeah, this is one of the yard signs that they used in Jackson County. Okay, so which area do you feel least confident in when it comes to local ballot initiatives? Is it understanding tax policy and just what's even allowable? Is it the voter mobilization that Todd was starting to describe? Is it fundraising for this kind of work? Who can pay for it? Is it the public opinion research and polling and messaging that you get stuck on, or is it something else? And Jimmy, you can let it go. So maybe as people are voting, you can start to give a little bit of a sense of what it takes in each of these areas.
Mm-hmm. Every place is different, okay? Some places, like New York's in the house, you know, they've got a state constitution that is somewhat prohibitive to do local tax initiatives. If you're faced with that, there are other things you can do about building a public constituency in a very sophisticated fashion to help influence the decision makers in doing a set-aside or even levying a new tax on your behalf, okay? And the Children's Funding Project is about all sorts of things, including that. We're just not about ballot initiatives. You may need a state-enabling piece of legislation to allow you to pass a tax locally. The farther west you go and the farther south you go, the laws are a little bit more liberal in terms of how you can place something on the ballot. It's easier. It's easier in California than it is in New York. So again, every place is different. Make sure you study all of the options. There's this creature called home rule, which many of you are familiar with, some of you aren't, that allows counties and cities to do a lot of things that their powers granted by the state to those localities to levy taxes and to set up certain programs and the like. Study your home rule charter in your area.
And I will just add that one of the things that we're doing through the Children's Funding Project, and Megan is somewhere buzzing about the room, is putting together sort of a cheat sheet for people on state by state, what are those rules, what can citizens initiate, who has a home rule versus Dillon's rule state, those kinds of questions. So we're going to be trying to sort of compile that kind of information for you.
Right, and so every place is different. So look, you know, it's all local. All politics are local, like Tip O'Neill used to say. So make sure that you know the rules that apply before you invest. In terms of fundraising, when you do a ballot initiative, I'm going to focus on ballot initiatives here at this point. There are really three phases at which your money can come in. The first phase is at the end of the needs assessment. Okay, and that's really the first step you've got to do. You know, you've got the need, you've got it identified, and funders will rally around the effort to rectify those needs. The second is at the end of your first round of polling, your benchmark poll. If the polling is good, you're more likely to raise money. If it's not, you know, you may have a problem on your hands and want to think outside the box or take another path. The third is once you qualify for the ballot, whether it's your county commission putting you on the ballot or if you have to go out and collect signatures to qualify for the ballot, that's the third phase. Each one of those three phases will help you build your money. If you think you can't raise the money, you're thinking wrong. Everybody can. Now again, every place is different. In Missouri, most of the money is about a third from nonprofits, a third from foundations, and a third from other sources like local corporations who have an interest in this sort of thing. But as we move forward right now, the private sector, the corporate community is increasingly becoming a player in these initiatives. Why? Two reasons. As communities have tried different paths of renewal over the last 30 years, they have given away the store. You see it in your own communities. Everything's tiffed to high heaven. There's tax breaks for this, tax breaks for that. They've got nothing else to give away. And it has had a minimal return. So now we're moving into an era of investment, and they realize it, even the private sector. And their greatest need in these communities is an able workforce. The reason why Pittsburgh can't draw any more healthcare entities like it would is because these entities look at it like, oh, you've got the incentives. It's a great place to be. You got a good airport, all those things, but you don't have the workforce. So as you move forward, even from our experience in Missouri and elsewhere, in years ahead, the corporate community will be a bigger player.
Yeah. Let's, I want you to start thinking about your questions and be ready, and there's going to be some mics walking around. Who's going to have those? Megan's got one, Nalini's got one, yeah. Okay, so please put your hands up if you've got a question. This is the Socratic method part of the session, so let's see, I guess in the Socratic method, I have to ask you a probing question, right? Do you have one?
Well, actually, I wanted to make a comment about, about putting ballots forward and public messaging and all of that. I think it's really important to recognize that not only the voters are hearing your message, but young people are hearing your message and communities are hearing your message. And that there are some messages that may poll best, and then there's messages that will poll good enough to get the vote. And we have to be willing to put our equity lens onto the messaging that we put out there as well. Best Starts polled very well in our most conservative regions around you know, keeping kids off the street and drugs and all of this. And I really pushed back hard and said, that's not the message I want my kids to know about why we're investing in this. What actually polled a close second, which they hadn't thought about, was that we are a prosperous county and we want everyone to have that opportunity. That passed our ballot measure, and that's a different message for our kids to hear than the other ones. So.
Yeah, yeah.
May I ask Sheila a question? Sheila, in your experience, when you passed your measure, was there a constituency that surprised you, that came forward to support, that you did not anticipate?
You know, I'm not sure, not for me. I think that people were surprised that we had broad support for our initiative. I kind of think that most people really do when you put a frame on it to say, we all deserve to be doing well. People kind of bought into that, but that was a surprise to folks that that was going to be the message. So less a constituency and more the message that people were surprised that it polled well.
I know you don't want to be thinking about this just yet, but your
I know where you're going.
I know. So your levy was only for 6 years.
Yes.
You are going to be in the position that Sean was just in with reauthorization. Have you thought much about that yet?
Still working on implementation. My brain has gone there and really trying to think about how will we promote the outcomes that we've achieved, the results that we've achieved. But what's going to be the hardest thing is because we have such a big time frame is being able to convince people stay the course.
Yep.
Because we have kids who were born right when Best Start started, and we could see even more results for them if we reinvest.
That's a good message. Yeah,
So.
sounds solid.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we've got a question somewhere over there around this podium.
Yes.
Sorry,
Can
sir.
you hear me?
Yes.
My name's Hamilton Simons-Jones, and I'm here from New Orleans. And I actually have two questions for two different panelists since I got the mic, right? One is in Jackson County is what the total cost of the campaign was. And then the second, in Florida, around your children's cabinet that you talked about, is if you all had considered children and family voice in that cabinet, and if how that conversation went based on that commitment, if there is one.
A safe formula in almost any community in the United States is if you take the population of the jurisdiction you've targeted and times it by 0.75, you will be pretty close to the budget you need to pass the measure. That is, if you use techniques where you don't have to rely upon electronic media. That means radio and TV. Okay? That's a campaign based on mail, field, social media, and what we call modeling. So that would be, the Jackson County campaign cost $435,000. It was at the end of the day.
And as Todd talks, I think people might be sitting there feeling slightly uncomfortable with the big P politics that this sounds like, but I think there's a huge amount of work that you can do as a 501c3 to
Absolutely.
tee this up, to just get the gears in motion, and then you may at some point, you want to just say a word on that?
Yeah, the IRS regulations are a lot more liberal than you would give them credit for being. You can do your public education. You can do your research, your polling through your 501c3. When you go to your political action committee or C4 for activity is when you are asking voters to do something, okay, to take an action. And that's kind of a good test, to keep in mind. So if you begin asking them to sign petitions or to support your measure or something like that, that's your political action committee or the C4. They need to take care of that. But if you're just educating the public and doing polling, you can do that through a C3.
Yeah,
and so you didn't ask me about the dollar amount, but I'm just going to let you know anyway because it popped into my head. We spent $120,000 in St. Lucie County. You asked if we had children and families' voices on our roundtable. Was that the question? Mm-hmm. We do. Not at the formal roundtable, because to be honest with you, to get all those people to meet isn't always conducive to when parents can meet. But we have a youth leadership group. So we have probably about 5 students from all of the high schools that get together once a month, and they talk about what we've talked about at the roundtable and give their input. And we also do focus groups consistently with our young people. And then we also, obviously, one of the things that a lot of our programs struggle with is parent engagement. But we've been trying to work on getting more feedback from parents. And I just wanted to touch upon, if I can, I appreciate what you said about the positive messaging, because I think that's so important. I'll be honest with you, when the campaign told me that they were going to message the way I just said it, I was just like, that's unacceptable. I can't, that's not what we do. But they came back to me, the campaign says, look, do you want to win or not? And I'll be honest with you, if he told me I had to mention fried bananas 20 times a day in order to win, I would have mentioned fried bananas, because if we lost, all that funding would have gone away. So I admire you for sticking to that, and I, in retrospect, wish I could have done the same thing.
Yeah. Well, and again, you've got a highly senior citizen community, too. It's just a different set of priorities there. So other questions that folks have?
Folks are thinking one thing about messaging that is important is that, remember, in a campaign, it's very repetitive and very basic. You all are very bright people, and you know so much about your programs and your services and all of this. Joe Voter doesn't care about 90% of what you know, okay? And it's not persuasive to them. So if you do enter campaign mode, don't be frustrated with how elementary it sounds and how repetitive it is.
Great.
So my question is, how do you decide where the fund lives? Is it best in a nonprofit, an intermediary, a municipal department? And what do you think works best?
Who wants to start on that?
Well, so our excuse me, ours was a property tax, so it was living with the government. What was interesting is once you're internally in the county, the question of which department did it live in became a really big question for us, and whether it could live in 2 or 3 or right now it lives in our Department of Community and Human Services. But the money for our prenatal to 5 investment sort of funnels through that department and goes directly to our Department of Public Health. But for us, because that property tax, it made sense for us to be there. Now we have certain strategies that are a few million for a particular strategy where we're working with an intermediary in the community, a nonprofit that we will give a bundle of funding to. We're doing this with our Parent-Child Home Program dollars. We're actually giving United Way because they have been doing that throughout our county in many ways. And we're in the process of working with Schools Out Washington for our out-of-school time dollars. So once it comes to us after that campaign part, we're trying to figure out where's the best way for us either to lead the work or to be able to leverage work that's already happening within our region. It's not our intentions with Best Starts to come in and redo everything that everyone's doing. So,
our funding mechanism comes directly to, we're a unit of local government. We are separate from the county commission. We have our own board of directors as dictated by state statute, and they make the funding decisions.
And can I just add, this is my favorite tweet that I get to do. So there are 36,000 special taxing districts in the United States, and they're usually for things like sewage and stadiums and, airports. Guess how many there are for kids? 8. And the 8 in Florida are the 8. So to me, this is an untapped opportunity to think about how we make special taxing districts to support our children and our future workforce in communities across the country. So, Todd, Jackson County, how are they setting there?
Similar to Florida in Missouri. They are an independent board. They are appointed by the county executive or mayor, the case may be, and they run the fund independently. The revenues are collected by the county, but only are there momentarily before they move to the fund.
Great. I think we have time for one last question. Yeah.
This is a question for Todd. We saw the yard sign for your messaging. I'm wondering what your messaging was or in the main part of Kansas City that you were going for, and if it changed when you went out and looked at a more conservative area.
Mm-hmm. It did. Renewal was, of course, the overarching theme for the entire county, and that really did play well in all parts of the county. In the city, they were more concerned with homelessness, suicide, and foster care. Out in the county, it was drug abuse, child abuse, and juvenile crime, honestly. So they were two very separate.
That's the same things you just heard from Sean. Yeah,
right.
That's interesting.
Sean, same experience. Would you like to?
No, I think when messaging for our population, knowing that they were 64 years old, if you think about what I mentioned, how we message it, make sure every baby's a healthy baby, stopping child abuse, keeping kids off the streets, off drug, alcohol, and other risk behaviors. In school, there's a health and safety component to it. And I'm not saying, there's a safety issue that permeates that voting population, and I think that was purposeful in the messaging.
Yeah.
And so there's a level of sophistication there, and the tools that you use to convey the messages really can make a big difference. I mean, all of the moving parts of a campaign can seem overwhelming. You've all got enough to do in the work that you're doing already, but think of it this way, okay? In the last few years, and especially the last few months, we've had a lot of institutions that have been diminished and ridiculed and even compromised, considering the new politic. Your voters, your constituencies are looking for new avenues and new ways to not even think, but new ways to do. I mean, really, the folks in this room are one of the few remaining firewalls that can help preserve and promote a civil society in this country.
Well, there's a message that we can close the conference on, right?
And so take that home and be thinking about opportunities under the umbrella of the Children's Funding Project that you could pursue.
Great. Any last comments from either of you about sort of encouraging people to take this on in their own communities?
I would just say, obviously, having a consistent local funding stream that's willing to work and partner with programs as opposed to, we are the funder, this is what you must do, is crucial to success. And the messaging, while we all talked about how we message for the campaign, It's important to realize that the language that we speak at the conferences like this the general public doesn't understand. And we have to work on that language, because whether you're going out for a ballot initiative or just talking to the community to get support for what we do, we have to speak their language.
Any last thoughts?
Well, I would say that we didn't talk a lot about this, but for me, it's a reflection of what our community needs, all of our communities. So whether I'm going into deep rural South County or I'm going into the middle of Seattle, the issue for me is, what is it that your community needs? Very simply now, we're not in campaign mode, but when I tell people about Best Starts for Kids, I say, you know what, we're increasing the good, we're decreasing the bad, it's going to lead to our youth thriving. What does that mean in your community? And we can reflect that back through all of the work that we do in implementing.
Great. Well, I want to thank you. And we have one more poll question. So before we give these guys a round of applause, I want to get you all, if Jimmy, we can get the poll up there. So we're going to attempt a word cloud type of a thing here. So let's see what happens. What phrase, and keep it short, keep it real short, best describes the next steps that you plan to take in your community once you return to secure a comprehensive set of supports and opportunities to get that insulated pipeline fully funded so that young people are successful? What is a short phrase that describes something you're going to do when you get home? You guys are getting good at this. Wow.
Yeah. Pros.
Woo. You could get a little dizzy watching.
I know.
Getting seasick.
Yeah, it's like sitting too close at the movies.
No, that's funny.
Tomato.
Tomato.
Great. So let's see if I can catch some of these. Fund development, message, align, poll, tell the story, 21st century. Good. Somebody protect that, please. Tomato. Who did that?
Yeah.
Who said tomato? Try to implement an equity audit. Nice.
I like that.
Radical collaboration. All right.
Banana.
So, Jimmy, I want to see if we can make this into a word cloud instead of just individual words, to see if we've got some synergy going between everyone. Ooh. Wow. Okay, so we could sit here and watch this all day, but we're going to leave it up. And I just want you to help me in thanking these three for sharing their stories with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.